What if I told you that the most legendary sneaker of all time has secrets that nobody knows? Well, most players have signature sneakers. Jordan built an entire brand based on his name and game. This NBA great used his fame to earn billions of dollars while also forging an industry built on shoes. But how did he do it? What's the secret to his massive success? Lace up and let's dive into the story of how Michael Jordan saved Nike and created a sports empire. Chapter 1: The Humble Beginning. You may know him as arguably the most recognizable athlete in the history of professional sports. But Michael Jordan wasn't the biggest thing in basketball or business when he was young. He was born to a true middle-class family to hard-working parents who didn't have all the riches or the business acumen of a seasoned entrepreneur. While they may have lived paycheck to paycheck, the Jordan family worked hard to provide for Michael and his brothers. As for MJ, basketball was his escape, even if the sport didn't love him back initially. As the famous story goes, the man known as the greatest of all time was cut from his high school basketball team when he was just a sophomore because he was deemed too short at 5'11". After crying the entire night, he went to work and starred in the junior basketball team before growing 4 inches over the summer. That was when he made the varsity team a year later and dominated the high school ranks well enough that he received numerous offers from different colleges, including Duke, South Carolina, Syracuse, and Virginia. He ultimately accepted North Carolina's offer, deciding to major in geography because he wanted to be a meteorologist. Imagine that! A man who eventually became worth more than $3 billion wanted to be a meteorologist when he was young. As you know, he never got a chance to live that dream because he went on to pursue a bigger one. Michael Jordan became a household name in college. As a freshman, he was already a standout player who averaged 13.4 points for the legendary Dean Smith's team-oriented style of play. But as good as he was in college, the major turning point of his life came in the 1982 NCAA championship game, when he made the game-winning jump shot that allowed North Carolina to clinch the championship win. Jordan was now a legendary name in basketball, and NBA scouts already had their eyes on him even though he was still in college. While Jordan never won the national championship again, he was the National College Player of the Year in 1984. He made a career out of highlight reel dunks, high-flying layups, and feats of athleticism the world had never seen before. There were a lot of people calling him the next coming of Julius Erving, the most popular high-flying player in all of basketball at that time. After all, as Dr. J was getting older, people were looking for the next heir to the high-flying throne, and Jordan was the man fans and experts alike were looking at. He was quickly becoming so popular that it was clear he was going to be one of the top players in the upcoming 1984 draft. On top of that, brands and different companies were already looking at MJ as the next big endorser in the world of sports. But one man was already scouting him as early as 1982. And this guy was the reason why Jordan and Nike ultimately grew together to dominate the world of sports. Chapter 2: Partnering with Nike. Michael Jordan may not have been the most sought-after player during the 1984 draft, but he was still a star on the rise. The Houston Rockets preferred Hakeem Olajuwon because having the best 7-foot center on your team was the best strategy for winning a championship during the 80s. On the other hand, while Mike had already proved himself a popular star in college, no team knew just how good he would be in the NBA. The Portland Trail Blazers even selected Sam Bowie, a 7'1" center, ahead of MJ, who was taken 3rd overall. And the reason why they took Bowie, who turned into a bust, wasn't because they needed a center, but because they thought Clyde Drexler, who they drafted a year ago, was just as good or even better than Jordan. But while Jordan was yet to prove himself as one of the brightest young stars in the league, there were already companies interested in his services as an endorser. Back then, the game was looking for the next big endorsement star in the NBA, as Julius Erving, the most popular high flyer in the league, was already getting old. There was no better player for companies to look at than Michael Jordan, because he was already the heir apparent to Dr. J's high-flying legacy. There was a time when players all over the league were wearing Converse's Chuck Taylor sneakers, which you probably know are more of a street sneaker instead of a sports shoe in today's more modern athletic world. You probably own a pair of Chucks but never dreamt of wearing them for basketball or running in general. Converse's popularity declined during the 70s when other brands like Puma, Adidas, and Nike stepped up their game. Nike in particular had a unique marketing scheme that allowed it to rise through the ranks as one of the best sports apparel companies in the world. Nike was already around during the 1960s when Phil Knight, a former track runner, founded it. But during the 70s, Knight realized he needed to step his game up to overtake its competition. He knew that more athletes needed to wear his shoes for Nike to become more popular. Sonny Vaccaro, who worked as the head of marketing for Nike, came up with the idea of paying college coaches to let his players wear Nike sneakers. Of course, they couldn't pay players outright because, at the time, the NCAA's rules prevented its athletes from being endorsers. So Vaccaro had to pay the coaches to make the players wear Nike. But while the strategy worked, Nike still wasn't the global giant it is today. It still faced stiff competition from its rivals, particularly Adidas, which was also climbing through the ranks as one of the biggest sports apparel companies in the world. That's when Vaccaro started looking at Michael Jordan. In fact, he said that he was already scouting him as early as 1982. Vaccaro told Knight and everyone in Nike that they needed to do whatever it took to get Jordan to sign as an endorser. However, Jordan wasn't sure about Nike. He wanted to be an Adidas athlete. He was so sure of his potential that he demanded every suitor to give him an exclusive shoe deal. Well, that's quite common today. Exclusive shoes were very rare in the 80s, with only the most popular players having their own signature line. The biggest contenders were Nike and Adidas. Of course, Converse didn't want to get into the Jordan fanfare. At that time, Converse was the league's official sneaker and already had lots of stars on its payroll. They didn't want to give Jordan a signature deal because he was still just a rookie who had yet to play an NBA minute. That left Nike and Adidas as the frontrunners. But Nike wanted to be the one to get Jordan's attention. The problem was that Jordan didn't even know what Nike was at that time. Nike needed to show Jordan they were serious, even though this company was still young compared to Converse and Adidas. Vaccaro, meanwhile, told executives to pour in all the resources they had on Jordan, even though Nike had a $2 million budget for several young players. Michael wasn't even planning on meeting with Nike because he didn't feel that this company was serious enough. But when Dolores, his mother, told him to sit down with these people and listen to their offer, he obliged. It was clear that the only way to reach Jordan at that time was through his family, especially his mom, because they were the only people he trusted. Well, Michael didn't seem interested in the offer because he wanted to be an Adidas athlete. The numbers were too much to turn down. Nike offered Jordan $2.5 million for 5 years. But that wasn't the final number. Dolores stepped in and told Nike that they had to offer him royalties for every apparel sold with Michael's likeness. As a banker, Dolores had some knowledge of business and finances, so she knew what kind of deal her son needed to enter to maximize his profits. But before Michael agreed to the deal, he needed to hear from Adidas. However, his favorite shoe company wasn't willing to match Nike's offer. In fact, they could only give him half of it. So, with his family's backing, Michael Jordan signed with Nike. He became the highest-paid endorser in the history of the league at that time because his shoe contract was 3 times larger than any other contract in the NBA. This was a partnership that benefited both parties in the long run, and it also led to the rise of one of the biggest brands in the world. Chapter 3: The Rise of Air Jordan. Michael Jordan and Nike were already business partners when the young star entered the NBA. The shoe company knew it was a gamble to sign an unproven rookie who was yet to make his NBA debut. But they were willing to go all in on him because they knew that he had the charisma and athleticism of a true star. They weren't wrong. Jordan broke out of the gates strong. He immediately became the Chicago Bulls' best player. Jordan was putting on high-scoring numbers while soaring through the air and dunking over his defenders. He became an icon overnight, and it was clear that he was the league's most sensational young player. Mike was so good that he made tenured NBA veterans look like they were rookies. And it didn't take long for him to become the hottest name in the NBA and in the shoe industry. Of course, Nike had a hand in it. In November 1984, just as Jordan's name was rising through the ranks, he started wearing the now iconic Air Jordan 1 sneakers. But these were no ordinary shoes because they were red and black. So you might be wondering what makes that special. Well, it's not really special, but the story behind it was what helped Nike rise as a shoe giant. You see, the NBA had a rule where you can't wear shoes that don't match the color of your team's jerseys. The Bulls wore red and white uniforms, so the black color in the first edition of the Air Jordan 1 sneakers violated that rule. Every time Jordan wore those shoes, the league imposed a $5,000 fine on him. But instead of designing a new shoe for him, Nike decided to use this to their advantage. They would pay the fine every single time Jordan wore the sneakers in a game. Well, $5,000 is a lot of money, especially during the 80s. It was nothing compared to the publicity Nike was getting. You know that the media likes blowing things up. So whenever Jordan and Nike got fined, the media almost always reported it. This gave Nike and the Air Jordan shoes an air of mystique that got people intrigued, leading to higher sales of Nike shoes. At that time, these sneakers were yet to be available to the public because Nike seemingly wanted to create some fanfare around the shoes and make people anticipate them. By February 1985, the NBA finally sent Nike a memo demanding them to stop breaking the rules. But instead of listening to the league, Nike once again used this to their advantage. Jordan and the shoe company released a series of commercials that featured the banned Air Jordan 1 sneakers. So if you were a kid watching those commercials during the 80s and hearing about how the NBA banned those shoes, you'd be naturally curious. But you wouldn't be thinking about how the NBA banned those shoes because of their colors. Instead, you'd be thinking that there must be something special in those sneakers that made the league think that it was unfair for Jordan to be wearing them. You'd be more naturally inclined to buy those shoes and wear them in games because you'd think you're going to have the same unfair advantage that Jordan gets every time he wears them. If you want to play like Mike, you must buy his sneakers, was the message in Nike's marketing strategy. That's how Nike created an air of mystique and anticipation behind those sneakers. So when they became available to the public in 1985, they sold like hotcakes. Early orders and sales reached $55 million. Meanwhile, Nike was projecting to sell up to 4 million pairs during the sneakers' debut year. Those numbers were well beyond their initial projections when they were still designing the Air Jordans. Before creating fanfare around the shoes, Nike projected only around 100,000 sneakers sold in 1985. Meanwhile, after signing Jordan, the goal was for the company to make $3 million for its first 3 years. However, in just 1 year, the total profits ballooned to $126 million. That's when Nike realized they had a gold mine in Michael Jordan. Of course, the profits weren't just because Nike had marketing geniuses on their team. Jordan was also a huge part of that success because he was putting up great numbers and putting on highlight reel plays on a daily basis. MJ's combination of flair, charisma, and playing style led to the rise of arguably the most popular basketball player of all time. Nike, meanwhile, rode the hype. As for Jordan, he went on to forge a legendary career that turned him into a generational icon. Michael Jordan dunked Nike into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Chapter 4: Becoming the GOAT. Michael Jordan was not only the greatest basketball endorser during the 80s, but was also quickly becoming one of the greatest athletes of all time. Of course, throughout the early part of his career, he compiled ridiculous stats and made dozens of highlight reel plays and dunks, especially his iconic dunks in the slam dunk contests. On top of that, he was making a ton of money. Back then, players weren't getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars to play in the NBA. Jordan's rookie salary was around $2.7 million in total. So basically, he was earning more from his contract with Nike because of the royalties he was getting. But as Jordan's name rose, so did his earnings. By 1988, he positioned himself to a 6-year contract worth more than $20 million, the largest contract in league history at that time. And during that time, he was forging his legacy as arguably the greatest of all time. Jordan was getting all these individual awards and accolades. He was the MVP, the best scorer in the game, and the greatest individual athlete in all of basketball. There was no one doubting how good he was, but the biggest question in the minds of everyone during the 80s was whether or not he could win a championship. If he wasn't losing to Larry Bird and the Celtics, he was getting pummeled by Isaiah Thomas and the Detroit Pistons. Sure, Mike was the best player in the league, but he wasn't on the best team. and people started questioning whether or not he could actually be the best player on a squad built to win championships. You could be making all those millions of dollars and signing record deals with Nike and the Chicago Bulls, but if you didn't have the championship hardware to back your legacy up, you can't be one of the greatest players of all time. So, by the time the 90s rolled out, Jordan was already a household name, arguably the most recognizable athlete in the world. But he wasn't a champion until 1991. By that time, Phil Jackson had taken over as the Bulls' head coach. Meanwhile, Scottie Pippen became a superstar in his own right. The Bulls won the NBA championship for the first time in 1991 at the expense of Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Lakers. Jordan and the Bulls did it again in 1992 and again in 1993. As a three-time champion and at the top of his game, Michael Jordan was now an unstoppable force in the world of basketball. And at that point in his career, his future was already secured because he was earning up to $4 million a year in the NBA and was a lifetime athlete with Nike. However, as fate would have it, Jordan had to fall and face his own demons. And this led to some of the biggest controversies in his career. Chapter 5: Gambling Problems and Setbacks. Michael Jordan was always the most competitive player in the history of the NBA. The problem was that this competitiveness extended to other areas outside the court. He was so competitive that he competed with everyone in every facet of life. And it came to a point where he got so addicted to competition that he started betting. No one knows how or where MJ developed an addiction to gambling. Some say that this started way back in high school because there are rumors that he once won an unknown bet with his prom date. There were even reports that he gambled with teammates and coaches alike during drills when he was still in college. Whenever there was a reason to bet, Jordan was ready to put money on the table. So when he got to the NBA, he was already making enough money to gamble to his heart's content. He'd play cards with writers, bet with his head of security in the locker room, and relentlessly bully his teammates in card games during flights. Even when he was preparing for the 1992 Olympics with the Dream Team, he played cards with his fellow superstar teammates nightly. And when there was enough time during the weekends or the off-seasons, he would go on a trip to Vegas or Atlantic City to gamble. But while he loved gambling with cards in casinos and just about everywhere else, his most expensive form of gambling was on the grass. Jordan loved golf, not only because he adored the sport, but also because he loved gambling on the green. In 1993, he even testified in court that he paid suspected drug dealer Slim Bouler $57,000 of gambling debts accumulated on the golf course. And Richard Aquinas, another one of his golfing buddies, once claimed that Jordan owed him $1.25 million from golf bets, which were unpaid until they eventually settled on a smaller amount of $300,000. His reputation took a hit in 1993 when he was spotted gambling in Atlantic City during a playoff series against the New York Knicks. He almost lost that series because of all those late-night gambling adventures he went on. To call Jordan a gambling addict is an understatement, but he always denies this.
Do you have a gambling problem?
No, I enjoy it. It's a hobby. If I had a problem, I'd be starving. I'd be hawking this watch. My championship rings, I would sell my house.
After all, there were rumors that David Stern secretly suspended Jordan in 1993 for gambling, and that his 2-year retirement period until 1995 was the time he served suspended. But those have been denied by both Jordan and Stern. The true reason behind his first retirement was his father's death in 1993. But because of the weird nature behind his father's death, there were conspiracies that connected this death with Jordan's gambling. And it was rumored that his dad was rumored to pay for Jordan's gambling debts, which had already ballooned to uncontrollable amounts in 1993. Jordan never stopped gambling, even after returning from his brief retirement period. The Chicago Bulls went on to win 3 more championships from 1996 to 1998, until Jordan retired a second time. But stories of his gambling adventures persisted. Ron Harper, his teammate and gambling buddy, told stories about how he and Jordan often gambled and golfed together. Now, you might be wondering how and why this is all relevant to the rise of the Jordan brand, and to MJ's status as one of the most successful former athletes in the financial world. Well, for starters, he was a gambling addict, plain and simple. Gambling addicts tend to lose all their money because they can't stop gambling. While Jordan claimed he could stop whenever he could, there was never any evidence to support that. He continued gambling even after his NBA years were done. However, there is no real reason as to how or why Michael Jordan was able to hold on to his wealth despite his gambling addiction. It might be true that he had a lot of gambling debts that he struggled to pay, but there's a good chance he only struggled to pay his debts because he wasn't very liquid. While he was earning a lot of money from the NBA and his endorsement deals, there was no guarantee that all those dollars went straight to his pocket. With his current success as a businessman, it's likely that he already had people pouring his millions into other investments, leaving Jordan with petty cash ready to be used from his bank account. Perhaps Jordan wasn't betting too much that he would risk losing everything he worked for. As he said, he didn't have a gambling problem despite his love for gambling. Saying that he has a gambling problem means that he's so addicted to it that he's willing to bet his house and all his fortunes. Maybe he just loves gambling because of the competitive high it gives him, and maybe when he gambled, he did so controllably. But it could also simply be a product of how much he was earning as opposed to how much he was losing. At that point, he had already secured a lifetime deal with Nike, which was the uncontested powerhouse of the sports apparel world. Even if Jordan just stayed at home all day, he was earning millions on his contracts and royalties with Nike and other big brands. The money coming in could have been so much bigger than the money going out. Of course, in 1996, he also became the first player in league history to sign a contract worth $30 million. That's a lot of money to lose in a series of gambling adventures. In all likelihood, he might have hired people to handle his money responsibly, because he probably knew he couldn't control himself even if he tried. And if that's what he did, then he made the best decision of his life because it allowed him to eventually create his own brand. Chapter 6: The Jordan Brand. After a forgetful stint as a baseball player during the time he was retired, Michael Jordan returned to the Chicago Bulls in 1995. Of course, that was also right around the same time he was filming the movie Space Jam, which eventually became the most successful basketball movie of all time, grossing more than $250 million at the international box office. After leading the Chicago Bulls to a 72-10 record and a championship during the 1995-96 season, the Jordan mythos was larger than ever. So, in 1997, MJ branched out of the Nike umbrella to introduce the Jordan brand, a brand separate from Nike but still under the entire company. The brand carries its signature Jumpman logo and is now one of the biggest brands in the world. But the rise of the Jordan brand wasn't done out of a whim or because Nike and Jordan were experimenting. Instead, it was because Jordan's signature shoes and apparel with Nike had become so popular that it felt like his name was its own brand within the company. The Jordan brand was the culmination of more than a decade long of success between MJ and Nike. Jordan was winning on the court and putting on fantastic plays and memorable moments. Meanwhile, Nike did its job by selling Jordan's shoes. And everything happened organically, all because of Jordan's on-court mystique and popularity. It all boils down to the fact that everyone wants to be a winner. Whenever people see Jordan winning on the court, they want to be like him. Not in the sense that they want to dunk from the free throw line and score 35 points a game. Instead, it's more about how they want to associate themselves with Jordan and his victories on the court. The fact that he was winning was the biggest reason why people gravitated toward him and his shoes. If he wasn't winning, we wouldn't even be having this conversation at all, because no one wants to buy products named after a loser. The Jordan brand's organic growth also comes into play when you realize he wore his signature shoes in every success, hardship, challenge, and tear-jerking moment he had on the court. He was wearing Jordan 6s when he won his first championship, and he was wearing Jordan 13s when he hit that memorable shot against the Utah Jazz in the 1998 NBA Finals. Michael Jordan's game and success were all the marketing Nike needed to help the Jordan brand grow, because people wanted to win like him or wear the same style that turned him into a global icon. Jordan didn't have to do a lot to get people to buy his sneakers. The Jordan brand grew to be so successful that it persisted and continued to make a lot of noise in the market long after MJ retired from the game. From new signature athletes like Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, and Luka Doncic, the Jordan brand always found a way to find some of the most notable talents and design shoes for them. But the legend of Michael Jordan is what people often hold on to whenever they buy classic Jordan sneakers. It could be a combination of nostalgia and social media hype, but the Jordan brand continues to sell a lot of Jordan's classic shoes. Older basketball heads love reminiscing about the past, while younger folks tend to love the retro street-style vibe that comes with wearing these shoes. And it also helped that in 2020, everyone was tuning into Netflix's The Last Dance. Sneaker sales ballooned because older fans started remembering Michael Jordan more. On the other hand, younger people got to know more about this legendary player. In fact, Jordan outsold all of Nike's other products because of The Last Dance. So even though the Jordan brand is known for its high-quality shoes, it is also popular among fashionistas because it has become the symbol of street fashion. Wherever you go, people wear Jordan shoes and apparel for casual and sporty wear on the streets. It's estimated that the current value of the Jordan brand is $7 billion. Of course, Nike and Michael Jordan benefited from this. Nike went on to become the uncontested leader in sports apparel. Meanwhile, MJ went on to build an empire. Chapter 7: Building an Empire. Michael Jordan retired from the game of basketball a second time in 1998 after winning 6 championships and numerous individual awards. At that point in history, he was considered the greatest of all time, the GOAT. He not only changed the game, but opened doors for other athletes to make millions of dollars. Jordan's signature deal with Nike in the 80s changed the shoe industry, not only because it allowed companies to innovate their technology, but also because his contract became the model for future signature athletes. The deal he signed in 1984 is the prototype in many of the different shoe deals that basketball players and other professional athletes sign with major shoe brands. Of course, his growth with Nike also allowed him to expand his brand because he allowed the Jordan brand to become one of the biggest names in the sneaker industry. But his empire wasn't only built on shoes. After retiring, Jordan famously became a minority owner of the Washington Wizards. He even came out of retirement in 2001 to play for the Wizards for 2 seasons, before retiring for good in 2003. While he eventually sold his stake with the Wizards, he eventually bought a share of the Charlotte Hornets because of his strong ties to North Carolina. Between then and now, he continued making money from Nike and his other endorsement deals, including Gatorade, McDonald's, and Hanes. It was estimated that his total earnings from endorsements alone were $2.4 billion. And his most recent royalty check from Nike was north of $260 million a year. But he scored his biggest earning in 2023 when he sold his majority stake with the Charlotte Hornets for $3 billion. The Hornets aren't the most valuable franchise in the league because they play for a smaller market and haven't been very successful. But because the league has been enjoying a boom in earnings and attendance numbers, Jordan quickly capitalized on an all-time high valuation when he sold his majority claim to this franchise. He still owns a minority stake in the Hornets, and it's likely that he's going to hold on to that for a long time. However, upon selling his share with the Hornets, his net worth quickly ballooned to $3.5 billion. And that's not something you usually see from some of the most successful athletes. Even Mark Cuban, former majority owner of the Dallas Mavericks, said that an athlete would have to be extremely lucky to become a billionaire. It's easy for an athlete to reach multi-millionaire status, but the challenge is reaching 10 figures because a billion is still 1,000 times more than a million. So where did Jordan see his luck? None other than his Jordan brand. As mentioned, the Jordan brand continues to be one of the most popular sports brands in the world, long after MJ retired from the game. At times, it may even be more popular than its parent company Nike. With Jordan earning 5% from that brand, it goes without saying that he doesn't even need to work to earn hundreds of millions of dollars every year. And it's an understatement to say that he's allowed that money to do the work for him, as he reinvested it in different businesses. Now, this is something that can only happen once in a lifetime to only one athlete. Not even the likes of Kobe Bryant and LeBron James reached those numbers with Nike. And even though Stephen Curry has already branched out of Under Armour to form the Curry brand, the sports apparel market is now far too saturated and controlled by Nike for Curry to experience the sudden boom that Michael Jordan saw with Nike and the Jordan brand. In short, luck had a lot to do with Jordan's success because he came at the right time and joined the right company. It's a kind of luck that's almost impossible for any athlete to duplicate nowadays, even if they end up forging a career better than Michael Jordan. But luck is simply a residue of design, and thanks to his hard work as an athlete and the guidance of his mother, Michael Jordan and his Jordan brand will continue to dominate the world of sports for years to come. Thanks for watching Rim Rumble.